Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Bucks Latest presented by FanArch. I'm your host, Dean Simon. Before we get into everything, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We are still very much on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so if you could hit that big red button, I would really appreciate it. Also, if you could turn on post notifications so you don't miss another episode and you stay up to date with all the latest Milwaukee Bucks updates, would really appreciate that as well. All right, first thing on the docket is that the Rockets general manager, Raphael Stone, he recently came out and talked about his previous offseason dealings and specifically before the Kevin Durant trade and whether the Rockets were going to go after a guy like KD or a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo. And he made an appearance on a podcast essentially, and he made an indirect reference basically to Giannis and to the Milwaukee Bucks when talking about his conversations that he had with John Horst, the general manager of the Bucks, and their conversations regarding a potential Giannis swap, even though it was kind of predetermined from the beginning that nothing was really going to happen or materialize. But Kurt Helen of NBC Sports, he came out with an article that basically went over and reviewed Raphael Stone's points about how a deal with the Milwaukee Bucks and with John Horst wasn't really going to take, nothing was going to go into effect. And again, they made indirect references to Giannis during this conversation, during the situations, because as the rules have it, that you can't directly reference a player that's under a contract with another team. So they went about it in a way that Raphael Stone said that he was talking about the big guy from Greece that's in Milwaukee, or the Greek big guy in Milwaukee. And he basically said, and I quote, I deal well with John Horst. I really like him. John was very clear that they weren't doing anything. So that was that. And thankfully, I feel like that's the only short and sweet answer that I've seen from anybody, whether they're in the NBA or, they're in front offices, or they're a very high level, high ranking media personality that has a lot of ties with different executives and people in the front offices. That's probably the most concise and short and sweet answer in terms of any potential Giannis or Milwaukee Bucks Giannis dealings. And the fact that it's just not really going to happen, or at least that it wasn't going to happen this past year, of somebody just saying, talked with John and nothing really materialized. So that was that. Didn't really prod on it, and we just kind of moved forward. And of course, Houston ended up making another move, and Raphael Stone ended up welcoming Kevin Durant into the fold. So the Rockets are looking to compete with their core group of young guys, adding in a 37-year-old Kevin Durant. So they're going to see how that goes. But of course, conversations in terms of Giannis's availability, they clearly did not go anywhere. And I figure that those types of conversations with prospective new teams that are going to get into it, they're not going to go anywhere either. But I'm just happy to have heard that kind of answer that, talked with him. And it was clear that, nothing was really going to come out of this. So we didn't really stick on it too long and we moved on. I'm just happy to hear that that was a real answer that an executive, a general manager came to in with regard to discussions surrounding Giannis with John Horst. But speaking of that big guy in Milwaukee from Greece, I just wanted to touch on the fact that Giannis, I'm not going to say that he is gonna be lasting as long as LeBron James is in this league, and that he's gonna continue to develop at a rate similar to LeBron. But one thing that I will say about Giannis is that I am so happy that he's leaning more into the mid-range shot, and that of course we saw this past year he took a massive leap in terms of his mid-range shooting and his efficiency, or just his willingness to get into more pull-up mid-range jump shooting. And uh of course this is something that he works on tirelessly in the off season. And actually, Hoops Habits Cal Durrett, he came out with an article because Giannis, for Greece in Eurobasket, he's been playing these kind of exhibition warm-up games before they get into the real thing in Eurobasket. And in these beginning games, which, it's the most basketball, it's the most action that we've been able to see, since the end of summer league and now leading up to getting close to training camp and the preseason. Eurobasket is really all we have in terms of competitive basketball right now. And Cal Durrett said, and I quote, In Greece's recent game against Latvia in Eurobasket, Giannis unleashed a smoother looking jump shot. He had 4 shots outside of the paint, keeping defenses honest by pulling up for jumpers rather than bullying his way to the rim. To his credit, Giannis was already much improved as a shooter last season. 21% of his shots came from mid range last season, and he shot a strong 44.2% on those attempts, according to NBA stats. And again, I don't really mean to fully compare him to LeBron in this way because of course LeBron it's a lot different that he's become better of a three-point shooter specifically as his career goes on. And I forget who said it, but a prominent figure in basketball media had said that I'm forgetting the name, so forgive me to whoever it is out there if you're watching, but someone said that LeBron James is probably going to retire as being the best three-point shooter, or having some of the best three-point shooting seasons that he's ever had, which is a crazy thing to think about for a guy that's going into year 23 and he's going to be 41 in December. But similar to Giannis, as now he's not necessarily entering an era of his career where his athleticism is lacking in any sort of context whatsoever, but he's going to start trying to add more and more to his game as he gets older. Of course, just crossed 30 years old. And again, while nowadays that's not the biggest benchmark of age, or that's not really an age where players are showing obvious decline in today's game, adding a mid-range shot and continuing to try and hone in on that mid-range shot and start to get more efficient and be able to get into these shots a little bit easier. That's something that Giannis is gonna have to focus on more and more as the years go forward, and especially going into a year like next year where it's basically just gonna be him and he's gonna be he's always the focal point of the offense, but uh, more now to any degree than it has been previously in his career. So I'm really, really excited for Giannis to continue developing that jump shot in the mid range over this summer and then going into next year. And I'm really excited to see what it could potentially turn into in terms of how it will impact his season averages for next year, and whether his mid-range shooting, maybe he could take even another jump going into next year and that could affect his chances of coming away with his third MVP award. So, maybe it won't have that big of an impact, but hopeful, wishful thinking over here. And someone who I'm also hoping will, jump up in 2025, 26 is Gary Trent Jr. And I've talked at length about Gary Trent Jr. and of course the sensational jump shooting season that he had, but and the playoffs and how he was able to really show off his entire offensive skill set in the postseason when he was really relied upon as the second best scorer on the Milwaukee Bucks other than Giannis Antetokounmpo. And during that playoff run, of course, he showed more of an on-ball scoring acumen, and of course, his catch and shoot ability was still there as well. But going into next year, he's probably going to be slotted as the starting shooting guard full time next to Giannis, and it's really, I believe he's really going to have a huge impact on the Bucks, possibly netting a 50-win season going into next year. And while that might not be the most likely of outcomes, it's, again, wishful thinking if all goes well and all goes perfectly. But I don't think it's that far fetched of an idea to assume that Gary Trent Jr. has essentially a career year or one of the best years of his career so far, and he partially leads the Bucks to a great standing in the postseason. And most of me is thinking this because Basketball Reference, they do before the season starts, they do kind of per 36-minute projections of each player in the NBA. You could, go on any player's page on Basketball Reference, and you could see their per 36-minute projections for the 2025-26 season. And Gary Trent Jr., according again to, and per 36 minutes, it's not a perfect stat, but they have Gary Trent Jr. at averaging per 36 minutes 16.8 points, 1.4 steals, and shooting 40.4% on threes. So the 16.8 points, that's something that it's a mark that we know that he can get to and that he's gotten to in his career. Of course, as a member of the Toronto Raptors, where he had more of his own team, or just he was more free to do whatever he wanted, essentially. So the 16.8 points, that's a benchmark that I feel like is more likely than some people may realize that he could hit. But the 1.4 steals, that would be the results of him continuing to just be an incredibly aggressive and relentless defender. The one thing that I've loved about Gary Trent Jr.'s defense the most is that and of course you would like to say this about every player, but that he just tries and that he's always, number one, just very attentive on that end, but he never gives up. He never really gives any ground. And even when he does, he still manages to fight back into the picture and make great contests. And he just never really gives up on any given play, has quick feet, quick hands, and he just always, again, tries to stay in the picture. So I feel like him having a massive year on the offensive end, plus him just being a more active and willing participant on the defensive end, as Basketball Reference here is projecting, it could really have a huge impact on the Bucks, potentially shocking everybody in the Eastern Conference and netting a top 4 seed in the East, which it wouldn't necessarily be a shock if Giannis ended up going on a crazy tear, averaging 32, 12, and 8, and winning his third MVP award. But Gary Trent Jr. could potentially have a huge impact on the Bucks getting to a point where they just completely shock the Eastern Conference. So I'm very, very much looking forward to what Gary Trent Jr. can do and how much he can impact winning for the Milwaukee Bucks next year. And finally, this isn't going to be specifically about the 2025-26 season, but just wanted to go over this. So, Fansided's William Moxon, he took on the tall task of ranking Giannis Antetokounmpo's 10 best teammates throughout his entire career. And, there were the usual suspects that ended up on this list. There was, I believe, Dante DiVincenzo at number 10. Bobby Portis came around number 5. Brooke Lopez was maybe number 4. But what shocked me the most about the placement of certain guys on this list was that Damian Lillard was placed at number 3 on the list of Giannis's best teammates of all time. And I think number 2 was Drew Holiday and number 1 was Chris Middleton, of course. But just the fact that Damian Lillard landed at 3, it of course, the argument is that Damian Lillard, from a talent standpoint, is the best player that Giannis has ever played with by far. And of course, the regular season and postseason stats for however little they played together actually in the postseason, the stats back it up. Of course, the regular season stats back it up. So it's not like you can really argue against a placement like that, but it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But William Moxon, he's very he realizes that this is a very tough thing to do, and it's just hard to put Lillard on the list, and wherever you rank him, you're going to feel weird about it. And he was, very aware of that. He was very self aware. And he said in his article, and I quote, "Where Damian Lillard lands on this list is so incredibly difficult. Talent wise, he's arguably the best teammate Giannis has ever played with. However, injuries, roster construction issues, and poor decisions with head coach hirings ultimately led to the duo never reaching the full potential we hoped they would." And that's about all you could that was a perfect summation of why it's so difficult to consider placing Damian Lillard in a certain place on this list. Um, to be honest, I don't have as much of a problem with ranking him at number 3 because you have to take into account that purely from a talent standpoint, from a statistical average standpoint, Damian Lillard is by far the best teammate that Giannis has ever had, but the impact on winning is where things get separated. Of course, the just lack of time playing together, and that's why you had guys like Pat Connaughton and even PJ Tucker snuck on the list as well. And of course, it's just because he was so meaningful to that 2021 title run. So looking at things like that, and specifically for guys like DiVincenzo, guys like Brooke Lopez and Bobby Portis, you could see a world where just in totality, you could place a guy like Brooke Lopez or a guy like Bobby Portis over a guy like Damian Lillard, specifically on this kind of list where it's Giannis Antetokounmpo's best Bucks teammates of all time. And it wouldn't really have anything to do with individual statistics or ranks as a player. It's just how much they meant when they were alongside Giannis and how much they meant to winning with the Milwaukee Bucks. So it wouldn't have surprised me if, yeah, let's say a guy like Brooke Lopez, who had played defensive player of the year caliber defense and knocked down threes at a consistent rate throughout his Bucks tenure, especially when he started getting going more with 3-point shooting, or Bobby Portis could have edged out Lillard on a list like this. That wouldn't have been so crazy to me, but I do understand why Damian Lillard gets the boost ahead of those guys just because of how amazing and legendary of a player he is, and just again the pure statistical numbers that he put up next to Giannis Antetokounmpo. So in that way, you can't really argue it, but from a sentimental point of view and just what they meant to the team. You could see guys like Portis, see guys like Brook Lopez getting the nod over Damian Lillard. But anyways, that will be it for me today. Thank you very much for watching another episode of Bucks Latest presented by FanArch. Again, I've been Dean Simon. Before you go, make sure to tell me what you think in the comments. Would you have Damian Lillard top 3 in terms of Giannis's best teammates, or would Bobby Portis or Brook Lopez get the edge over that guy? And yeah, so just let me know what you think in the comments. Also, hit that big red subscribe button. Still on the road to 1,000 subscribers. I believe we're about to cross the 850 threshold, which is just amazing. Thank you guys so much for all of you that have done that already. And also turn on those post notifications so you don't miss future episodes. All right, I will see you guys in the next one, and go Bucks.